Hey, it's David with No Chaser. And it's been a little while since I posted. My apologies. I've been busy and I've had to stay busy to keep myself from going insane, which is what I'm going to start the topic with. Because now I know I have some listeners from other places around even the world. Shouts out to Australia, listener, viewer. Um, but I live in the American Midwest in a lovely place called Nebraska. But this happens to quite a few people, and it is winter. I believe it's winter elsewhere, if I remember. And it gets very dark very early, and it's very cold, and it's just frankly very depressing. Like, if you ever seen those commercials for antidepressants and before you take the magic antidepressant that they're pushing out, like the world is gray and it's like a montage, or even those like stupid, like as seen on TV commercials where like it's a slap chop and someone's cutting the tomatoes really poorly, or they can't use a broom, and it's all in gray and everything looks bad. That's kind of how like everything feels right now. It's just like this sort of like dreary grayness that is just pervasive, and it starts to feel like it's actually zapping you. I remember that speaking of prescriptions, they had talked about like a medication or treatment for seasonal affective disorder. And this was like one of those things where a lot of people were just like, seasonal affective disorder. Oh, what? Like the leaves are falling makes you sad, or it's snowy, so you're sad and angry, and like all that type of stuff. Just because I think there was this boom of like pharmaceutical production, and people thought it was all just frivolous, and they were just making stuff up. Like another example of that would be when they came out for medication for restless leg syndrome. It was just like, oh, you have a bouncy legs, now they're going to prescribe you. The truth is, as I like started to experience those things, like something like restless leg is actually maddening. If you've ever had restless leg syndrome when you're trying to sleep, it will drive you crazy. Like if it was something that I had like habitually, I would certainly take a medication for it because it's crazy making. And along those same lines, seasonal affective disorder is nothing to sneeze at, and it affects people. And honestly, if you think about it, it's for good measure. It's one of those things where I think people incorporate in their minds where it's just like, well, we all go through this stuff, so this shouldn't affect someone so like badly, and shouldn't be that big of an impact. But I don't know how those people in like Alaska or whatever, where it's like 30 days a night. I don't know how they do it. Maybe they comfort themselves by sleeping on piles of money because it's really cheap to live up there, or whatever, or they're like worried about being extradited. I don't know. But the thing is that just your surroundings and environment is just, I mean, it's what you live through. It's what you go through in your day. And so changes that really matter. Now, usually when I thought about those changes, I would think about things like social, environment. Like I always used to say that if you have a really terrible boss, that is not just like, oh, my boss sucks. That is a major influence on your life. Because like if you have bad coworkers or a toxic work environment, it is a major thing in your life, because a sad reality for a lot of people is that the coworkers are people you spend most your waking hour with. It may not be the most impactful thing, like spending time with your significant other, your spouse, your children, but the coworkers are the people you spend the most time with. Like, and so I would always take into importance, like, yes, the social environment that you have, the people around you, people that influence you. I think that we don't like to think how much other people influence us as much as they do, but they really do. So that one I totally understood. But just environment of just even more just tangible basic things like light and and weather and just, you could almost put it into the realm of social like environment too, because it affects other people in a certain way. Plans are canceled more often, especially if you have like any sort of bad winters. You can't do much outside. Like even something, here's even these crazy little things you don't think about. Where there was like, when I was a regular smoker, there'd be tons of times after like meetings or after work or just hanging out with people where outside you sit and maybe you chain smoke. It's not the greatest thing to do for you, but you get to talk with them and you get to know people, and you're just kind of smoking. I mean, unfortunately, it's a great instigator for conversation. I tell you one thing, I got to know the coworkers that smoked at my workplace way more than the other people. But you would just hang outside, right, and smoke for whatever time if you enjoyed the person's company. But when it gets really, really cold, even if you like that, even if like it's an enjoyable social thing, you're going to stop because it's really, really cold, and it's really dark, or it's bleak, and it affects so much. I mean, I hope I don't have to elaborate of like how this like affects the arena of like addiction and drinking and all that stuff, but it causes isolation. So even if you have like any like mental illness or just mental health problems, the environment you have that like pushes you towards isolation is like, again, nothing to sneeze at. And I think I feel like I've done this a lot through my life, where it's just like, again, because it's almost as if because something's expected, we don't give much credence to it. It's like, well, you just got to deal with it, as if it's like, a sort of emotional tax season. Like, yeah, you just got to deal with it, so who cares? But I feel like every time I'm just unprepared for it. And I've been going through it recently where I'm just like, man, it's harder to kind of get out and do things. And I mean, I'm telling you one thing, it actually hasn't even gotten too cold out yet. And, just things like, I have to get up. If you're talking about going to like group therapy or a meeting or hanging out with people or just anything, going to the gym, any sort of like pro-social or proactive behavior, you think about you have to get up, and then it's cold, and maybe you have to heat up your car. If you're like me, you park outside, so there's going to be ice on it, and you have to scrape that, and you just go outside, and you're like, oh, it's so cold, and just going through all that stuff when your bed is all snug and warm and cozy. And anything that pushes you towards that isolation there's going to be effects for it for sure. And like I said, I'm mainly making this video, one, to kind of just express feelings I've been having, because I know it's been affecting me. I know it's been making the days a little bit more arduous, and the depression sting a little bit more, and just it heightens all these kind of negative things. And I feel like, I mean, I know it's affected other people too. Like I just came from a meeting with people where I talked about this very thing, where it's just, and everyone's like, yeah, this is not great. Like the bleakness and the darkness and the sort of just like everybody, even just the demeanor of people, like even going to the grocery store, everybody's just huddled in and just walking quickly, and no one's even looking at you. You don't even want to say anything or do anything because you're just trying to get into warmth as quick as possible. And this doesn't just have to be like in terms of cold and winter. It's just the daylight savings, the way things get darker. I always considered myself like a night owl, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I just like the darkness to be at come upon us at like 4:30, as if giant spaceship has like flew over us in Independence Day and it's just clouded everything in darkness. I think I honestly like being a night owl more, because late at night, like the world is kind of asleep and no one can bother you. Maybe some of those things, but I mean, that's sort of like a healthy, solitary thing I like to do. But as far as like your opportunities to go out and be with people, it's harder to make plans. It's harder. Like I do things like I play like pick up basketball and stuff like that. And you can't really do that when it gets this cold out. You think about things where, I don't know, just events or things people hold together. It it really affects it. And anything that affects your ability to be with other people, to make connections, to just not stay in your own mind in a lonely room or basement or apartment or wherever you're at, anything to just not do that is very important. And I can't stress enough that, like, one of those things where you just have this mindset where it's just as if, well, it's winter always comes. It's literally the seasons. Like they use it as a metaphor of things that come around and you just come to expect. But I mean, I'll just be honest. I feel foolish because this happens every time, and I just seem to never have prepared myself for it. And I don't even know what preparing for it would look like. I honestly, I guess just trying to increase my social interaction with people and just keeping in touch with them through the robot device that controls all our lives. But I have to, it was something I just really wanted to touch upon, just because I think, as far as alcoholism and drinking and trying to stay in recovery, trying to stay sober, trying to keep good mental health, it's something that is, I think, very underrated. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the idea of like, oh, seasonal affective disorder or the restless leg or all that stuff that people kind of shoo away. And it's like, no, you should never feel ashamed if something's really impacting you, because it's impacting you, and it's something that you need to talk about. And I guarantee there will be a lot more people that it resonates with than you would think, as long as you express it. And hopefully I'm doing that right now. Hopefully it helps. Again, if you live in wherever else and you don't experience that, maybe you have some form of it or whatever. But anyway, thank you for listening to me rant. And I hope everybody is doing well. Everybody is, you're making it through whatever you're going through, and be well.